Tonight we are going to look at church history again. It's been a while since we've looked at it. I'll try to give you a recap of what we covered. I'd like to be more faithful to do this more often. You might ask yourself, why should I care? Well, there are a lot of reasons that you should care about history. You've heard someone say history repeats itself, and that is true. History goes in cycles. But it shows us our past, the legacy of Christianity. It shows us where God has been faithful. I mean, if you don't care about any other thing in church history, in any history, you ought to at least care that you can see the faithfulness of God. Did He promise to take care of us? And has He? Well, if you know history, if you look at it, then you're going to see how He has done that, how He's been faithful to us. And it helps us to appreciate where we are right now. If you don't know what happened before you, I mean, we can be so isolated that Christianity is just an American 21st century or 20th century religion. If you don't see what happened before you, how do you know where you really are? How do you know what's right? It's important to know where we've come from and how we got where we are. And it's important to be able to see some of the practices, some of the doctrines that are taught, some of the things that are going on that maybe the Bible doesn't address. So if we look at history, we can understand why words mean what they mean, how we got where we are. Okay? So it gives us an appreciation for that and keeps us from getting set in our ways and making this religion of ours American. Helps us to see it in the way that it was originally done and the way that it's been practiced for a long time. So, history of the Christian church. This is from a book written by a man named William Jones. It was written in the late 1800s. It's free, so if you have a tablet or you'd like to read on your computer or whatever, you can get it from Google and read as much of it as you want. It's really not a hard read. It's actually very interesting. A lot of it it's very well written. So, History of the Christian Church from the birth of Christ to the 19th century by William Jones. Last time we talked about how the Gentiles were scattered. Okay, remember, there was a general persecution. Jesus ascended into heaven. There was a general persecution. The Jewish disciples all scattered, and they ended up preaching the gospel everywhere they went, including the Gentiles. A lot of Gentiles were saved. Paul started his ministry. He went on his 3 missionary journeys. Those journeys were all over that part of the world. Mostly, he was the preacher to the Gentiles. And he, through those journeys, brought a lot of people to faith in Christ. He was arrested. He spent some time in prison, spent some time in house arrest. But he was let out. And then you remember there was the Great Fire in Rome. And it's believed that Paul probably went back to Rome to stand up for the Christians there, to speak out and be a voice. And when he was there, he was arrested a second time and didn't make it out of that one. Tradition says he was beheaded. He was martyred for the faith. But that wasn't the end of Christianity. He was a major player in Christianity, but his death didn't stop anything. After his death, the disciples spent a lot of time. There was a brief period of peace. There was an organization. Everybody had time to build and organize and appoint leaders and bishops, and the church really began to grow. The Lord added so many people to their numbers. And then in AD 70, there was Vespasian was the Roman emperor. His son Titus destroyed Jerusalem. He sacked Jerusalem and he utterly destroyed the temple. Remember that? We talked about how there wasn't any stone left on top of another, how the prophecy came true, and how the Jewish faith, the relics of Jewish faith were destroyed at that time. And there just wasn't anything left. Well, now we're going to move to the next part of the story. And we're going to look at the period between the destruction of the temple and the rise of Constantine. Now you probably know the name Constantine. He is one of the most pivotal figures in that time. He came on the scene in the early 300s, I think 306, something like that. But he legalized Christianity. He adopted it himself, and he legalized it along with all the other religions. But this part of the story is before that, when Christianity was still illegal. It wasn't accepted at all. Sometimes it was tolerated, but usually it wasn't. And I want to look at 4 what they call church fathers. I'm not advocating their doctrine. They have their own writings and stuff you can go on and read. But you can't deny their influence on the early church. Okay, and I'm not saying I disagree with their doctrine. I'm just saying they aren't here because of that. They're here because they were believers and they were very influential, and some of them are even martyrs. We're going to look at a man named Ignatius, a man named Polycarp, Justin Martyr, and Irenaeus is how you say that name, Irenaeus. Okay, so keep those names in mind. What I want you to look for while we go through this, there's a few things. I want you to keep an eye out for the Christian response to suffering. I want you to see how they responded throughout these cycles of persecution and rest. Because that's what it was. They would have so many years of peace and then so many years of just devastation. How did they respond to that? What did they do? Where did they go? What was the commitment they had to their faith and to each other? We're going to see their unity and how they didn't fall apart. That was the whole goal. Rome wanted to stop Christianity from spreading. And the more they struck, the more they tried to stomp it out, the worse it got, or the better it got. So, to begin, let's talk about the ups and downs of persecution. There were several Roman emperors, and they each could have their own policy. They each had their own attitude towards Christianity, and it just depended on that man. That was what dictated how the Christians were treated. We're going to go from Titus. So remember, you have Vespasian and his son Titus right after him. We're going to go all the way to a man named Septimius Severus. I don't care so much about the names as I want you to see the attitude that Rome had. I want you to watch the attitude of the Christians, okay? We don't care so much about the dates and the names. We are going to mention them. I want you to see the overall thing. Why? What? Okay? This covers the area for the era of about 79, we'll just say 80, to about 211. So about 80 years after Christ was born to about 200 years after Christ was born. Like I said, we're building up to Constantine. He was the first emperor to claim Christianity and all that. But for now, in these first 300 years, Christianity is usually illegal and persecuted, at least unrecognized. The first man, and I know I've covered their pictures in the thing here, but we're just going from top to bottom, left to right. The first man there is Titus. He was the one who destroyed the temple, burned it down in AD 70. 10 years after that, he became the emperor of Rome. He followed his father. And during his reign, there was relative peace for the Christians. But he only reigned 2 years, 2 months, and 22 days. In that time, I suppose he was just too busy. He had too many other things to do with squashing the rebellion and rebuilding and all that. He didn't bother the Christians much. But he was poisoned by his brother. His brother's name was Domitian. That's the second guy on there. And Domitian, it said, was as cruel as Nero. He wasn't the kind of guy that you wanted. He banished and killed a lot of Christians. We're going through Revelation Sunday morning. The man who banished John to the island of Patmos was Domitian. He didn't like his Christianity, and he killed a lot of them. But he also banished a lot of them. John was sent to that place to go and dig and work on that island. He changed, though, later in life. I don't quite understand exactly what it was and how drastic it was, but he revoked a lot of his policies. So where he was killing Christians and banishing them, he stopped doing that. He let a lot of them come back home. But really it was too late. He was assassinated, and a man named Nerva, the third one there, followed him. And Nerva was actually known for being a pretty good emperor. He was very humane. He outlawed persecution. And so you start to see this trend, right? You have Titus. He's at least apathetic, doesn't really care about Christianity. And that's how it was in the beginning. Christianity was just another sect of Judaism, so they didn't pay it much attention. Titus was that way. But then his brother comes along, and he just hates him. And so the way the book puts it in one place is he fully opened the floodgate of persecution. Did everything he could to try to stomp it out. But then after he died, it cooled back down. So you have a period of rest. And that's where Nerva came along. And he didn't harass him too much. But he wasn't in office very long. He died of a stroke. And he was followed by Emperor Trajan. That's the last one there on the top row. During the reign of Trajan, I want you to see, there's a man named Pliny. And they traded letters. And Pliny complained to Trajan that the temples, the pagan temples, were almost desolate and nobody was buying animals to sacrifice. That was the effect of Christianity during that time, in that first couple hundred years, where you had paganism running rampant and you had the government and a lot of people trying to stop it. It got to the point where nobody was going to the temples anymore. And I don't think it was necessarily that all of them were Christian, but that Christians played an important part in that, and they blamed the Christians for it. Pliny was upset, and he complained to him about it. And so he wrote this letter to him, and he confessed. He says, you know what, there were a couple of women, I had to torture them trying to find the truth. Anytime I find out that somebody's a Christian, I kill them. I try to, stomp this out. And during that time, he wanted to know what Trajan wanted him to do, and Trajan replied, and he said, look, you've done perfectly right. So that was his attitude. He wasn't shocked by killing people for their faith. But he said, look, here's what I want you to do. If you find out that a person is a Christian, you ask him. You arrest him, you try him. If he confesses to it, he's supposed to be executed. Christianity was a capital offense. But he was a little bit more fair than some of the others, because some of the dictators allowed any accusation. You don't even have to tell us who you are. If you just say that somebody's a Christian, that could be a death sentence for him without trial. But Trajan didn't like that. He wanted everybody to have a fair trial. He wouldn't take anonymous accusations. He required proof or at least a confession. And a lot of Christians died during his reign. But he died of a sickness, and he was followed by a man named Hadrian. So here you've got, again, this cycle. This man is a persecutor, Trajan. He's somewhat humane, but he's no friend of Christianity. And Hadrian comes along, and he offers relative peace. He didn't reign very long, though. And he died of heart failure, and some of his appointees took over. One of them was named Antoninus Pius, and the other was named Marcus Aurelius. If you ever watched the movie Gladiator, that's who that's supposed to be. They make him look a lot better in the movie than he did in real life, though. Their united reigns, William Jones says, their united reigns are possibly the only period in history in which the happiness of a great people was the sole object of the government. When Trajan died, before he died, he appointed Pius to rule after him. But there was a condition to that. He had to adopt Marcus Aurelius as his son. So the two of them ruled together. Pius was like the elder. He had more authority, I guess you could say, than Aurelius. But once Pius died, Aurelius had full control. Now, Pius himself, in his own personal character and intentions, was guiltless of Christian blood. He was great for Christians. He didn't hurt them, didn't persecute them. Marcus Aurelius, not so much. When Antonius Pius died, Marcus Aurelius started what's known as the fourth persecution of the Christians, and it was a time of terrible suffering. It was a capital offense to be a Christian without any consideration. They would say, look, he didn't rape anybody, he doesn't murder, he doesn't steal, he doesn't hold back any deposits, he pays his debts, he does everything that he's supposed to do. This is the only thing that you have against him. And they didn't care. Marcus Aurelius did not care. If you claimed to be a Christian, it was death. In fact, there were two men. Justin Martyr writes an account of these two men. Each were asked only one question. They had only one crime. Are you a Christian? And when they said yes, it was death immediately. So it was a dangerous time to be a Christian or to say that you were a Christian. Well, he lived so long, and then he finally died around AD 180. And then his son Commodus took over. You remember again that he's also in Gladiator. He reigned 13 years, and I'll tell you, I'm being careful to not spend too much time on the gory details because I don't want it to be about that. I want us to see the faithfulness of God and the Christian response to persecution and suffering. Commodus was a horrible man. He did things, he tortured people in ways that I couldn't even think of on my own. But, you know what's amazing? How interesting are the ways of God. Commodus had a concubine, and she favored Christians. Here's this woman who, she's not known for her morality. She's not known for her faith. But God says, I'm going to use her to tame the emperor, to keep him in control and give my people rest. And so because of her, he left the Christians alone. He was horrible to people. But God used her to make him leave the Christians alone. And because of that, the church was able to grow. They didn't kill people for being Christians during his, it wasn't as aggressive as a lot of other policies. He was such a terrible man, he was assassinated in 192. And a man named Septimius Severus took over. The first year was pretty peaceful. He didn't bother anybody. But the second year, his native ferocity of temper broke out afresh and kindled a very severe persecution against the Christians. He went on a rampage against anybody who followed Christ. In fact, he passed a law that said it's illegal and punishable by death for you to abandon the religion of your ancestors or your country. And so if you were a pagan and you wanted to be a Christian, you were going to have to commit a capital offense, a capital crime to do it. Now, the question that I have is, why did they hate the Christians so much? Why would these men who have so much, they've got gold and servants and they've got followers, got their own religion, why do they care what somebody down the road believes? People aren't even in their city. What difference does it make to them? And I think it's important that we understand this because it highlights for us, it shows us the differences, the different nature of Christianity from at least paganism, but really from world religions. Why did they hate Christians so much? Well, they had some good reasons. I mean, I don't think they're good reasons, but I can see how someone who has no faith would think that they're good reasons. Somebody who's involved in that kind of superstition would think that they're good reasons. Christians were hated because they claimed that there was only one true religion. It was one thing for them to say, well, here's a way to heaven, a way to God. Something else entirely to say, your way is not going to get you there. Only my way will do it. Christianity is both inflexible and exclusive. Your way can't get you there. Only this way can get you there. And what fellowship does Christ have with any false god? And so when they said you have to offer a sacrifice to the gods, right? You have to throw some grain in this altar for the gods. It wasn't so much that they were trying to make them stop being Christian, even though that's what it would amount to. It was a test to see how flexible is your religion. Are you going to admit that mine is as good as yours? As long as you'll throw some grain in there, I've got no problem with you being a Christian. As long as my gods are as good as your God, no problem. But the Christians wouldn't do that. They saw it as immoral to worship the gods of Rome. And so the people began to see them, the people of Rome began to see them as these stiff-necked, antisocial, prejudiced, immoral people. You have no morals, they would say. You don't care about society. In a society where religion was a focal point for a lot of things, you don't care about any of that. And the word got around that these people were so immoral. They spread rumors like the fact that they ate their children. The fact that they were cannibals. I don't know if it was during that time, but it became a rumor that Christians ate each other, or they ate human flesh, which is murder. And so a lot of times that's what they were tried for, not for their... In fact, there was a story about this group of Christians, a group of professors, who said, we believe, and they said, okay, you have to recant or we're going to kill you. Well, most of them wouldn't recant. And so they killed them for their faith. But the ones who did recant, they said, oh yeah, we've been terribly wrong about this. They said, okay, well, you're Christians, which means you've eaten other people, so you're going to have to die anyway for your murder. There was no way out for them. And it was after that most Christians, there was no point in recanting. So they stopped. But they spread those rumors about him. They said, well, you're immoral people. You call each other brother and sister. Well, that's incest. You have these weird sacrificial rites and things. So they blamed them for that. And they called them traitors. Because you have turned your back on the gods of your fathers. You don't follow the gods of your ancestors. And they abandoned the national gods. That's a real problem. Do you realize that the first Christians were called atheists? We hear the word atheist now, and this is why it's important to study this history. What is an atheist? Well, in our time, it means something totally different than what it used to mean. Or it's not the same thing anyway. Now it means you don't believe in any God. But back then it meant that you only serve one God. You deny the rest of them. And so they said these people are atheists. They don't believe in our gods. And here's the problem. Can we get by with having these immoral people in our nation? Maybe. What about the slap in the face to our whole society, to our legacy, to our heritage? Maybe. We might be able to let that slide. There was an earthquake in Antioch. And we're going to talk about one of the bishops who was there at that time. He was executed because the people were convinced. The Emperor Trajan was there in that city when that earthquake happened, and he almost died from it. And when he got out, the people blamed the Christians for the earthquake. If you had been doing what you're supposed to be doing, if you hadn't said these bad things about our gods, we would have never had this earthquake. This is their judgment on us because of you. And that is why they hated the Christians. You see, these are kind of good reasons. If you were a pagan and you knew nothing of faith and you believed in these gods, you would probably hate the Christians too. They're immoral. They're traitorous. They're traitors. They're atheists. And it's because of them that we're having all these troubles. And I've got a quote here. After the fire, remember we talked about the fire in Rome? Tacitus is his name. He wrote that Christians are persons convicted of hatred to all mankind. They are a mean bunch of people. That was the picture that they painted of Christians at the time. And this is why they hated them and why they wanted them gone. But despite all that, Christians remained faithful and pure, and the church grew. I want to read to you a couple of quotes that I found in the book. You see in this picture here, this is the wrong time period, but you get the same idea. You see the Christians there on their knees, and they're being pious. They're praying. They're not going to recant their faith. Those guys have axes. They're going to kill them if they don't. But they won't, because the church remains faithful unto death. In fact, they were so notorious for what the Romans would have called stubbornness and obstinance. When Pliny was writing to Trajan, one of the things he said is, I am quite wearied with punishing and destroying the Christians. He didn't like them. He didn't feel anything for them. He was getting tired of doing it, though. This is real work, killing all these people. Yet they never cease to profess voluntarily what they are and to offer themselves to death. Therefore, I have labored by exhortations and threats to discourage them from daring to confess to me. I have done everything I can to make it clear. Stop telling me that you're a Christian. I'm going to kill you if you do. Yet in spite of all persecution, they still continue to do it. There was one guy, he was a proconsul, like a governor or a mayor. He was in charge, and he had all these Christians in front of him, and he had to kill them. He had to judge them. So he did. He killed some of them, and to the rest, he got angry, and he ranted at them, saying, you wretches, if you want to die, you have ledges and ropes, precipices and halters. If you really want to die so badly, all you have to do is say that you're not a Christian. That's all you have to do, and we'll let you go. They're begging them, stop. If you really want to die so badly, stop making me do it and jump off the ledge. Hang yourself. Do something else. That was the attitude of the Romans. They were tired of killing all these Christians. They were tired of having them around. But the Christians were faithful unto death. They didn't let it stop them. Not only that, but they remained pure. They remained morally sound. They wanted to do what was right. Typically, their only crime was their faith. I'm going to quote Pliny again. When he was writing to Trajan, he confessed, they are accustomed, talking about what the Christians do, they're accustomed to assemble together before sunrise. They did it before sunrise because they didn't want to get in trouble. They didn't want to get caught. And to join together in singing hymns to Christ as a deity, binding themselves as with a solemn oath not to commit any kind of wickedness, to be guilty neither of theft, robbery, nor adultery, never to break a promise or to keep back a deposit when called upon. He even admits that when he passed a law saying you can't meet anymore, that they obeyed it. That's how obedient they were, how faithful they were to do what's right. They said, look, if we can't meet like this, we're not going to. We're going to find a different way to do our stuff. That's how obedient they were. In the book, the author, William Jones, wrote, the church continued until these times as a virgin, pure and uncorrupted. The church continued as a virgin, pure and uncorrupted. They would not bend on morality. And they took seriously. When Paul wrote to the Philippians to shine like stars in a crooked and depraved generation, they believed him. And they did what he said. You're right. We're going to shine. Now, what I want to do with the rest of our time is single out. We only have 8 minutes. What I want to do with the rest of our time is single out the four Christians I told you about, or the 4 fathers that I told you about, and just look. It's important that you know some of these. We all know who George Washington is. Is that important? Yes, that's important. We all know who Abraham Lincoln is. That's important. We all know who the important people are in history. And church history is no different. These are men who, after Christ ascended, after the apostles had all died, These are men who took the reins. These are the men who we owe a great debt because they did the things that were necessary. And of course, we know God did it. God gets all the glory for it. But these are the men that did it to get us where we are today. I want to single out 4 of them. The first one we're going to talk about is a man named Ignatius. Ignatius was born in 35 and he died in 108. He was converted at an early age and he was a disciple of John. He was the bishop of Antioch that I told you about when the earthquake came. He was known for his epistles. You know how Paul wrote letters to the churches? He did the same thing to at least 6 churches and another one to a man named Polycarp, who we'll talk about. He had the misfortune, or you might say the fortune, of being the pastor at Antioch when that earthquake hit. And so the Emperor Trajan blamed him. And he had him arrested because he's the leader of the Christians there. He's the one who caused the most problem. And they deported him to Rome. When he got there, they threw him into the theater where he was devoured by lions, devoured by beasts. And so he died. That was his legacy. That's why he's a martyr. Because he was willing to give his life for the faith. And he never apostatized. He never turned it down. He never recanted what he believed. The second man I want to tell you about is a man named Polycarp. 69 to 156. He also was a disciple of John, and he was the pastor of the church at Smyrna. See how it's related to Revelation. These men knew each other. There was a moment when a multitude of people were so angry, hated the Christians so much, they wanted his head. And I know I've read a lot, but this stuff is the stuff they say. The crowd said about him, "This is the doctor of Asia, the father of the Christians, the subverter of our gods, who teaches many that they must not perform the sacred rites, nor worship our deities. Away with these atheists." They wanted him dead. Well, he fled. He escaped, got away to a nearby village. But you know what he found out? That his brethren were being tortured while they were looking for him. Now, he can't stay, can he? He can't stay in that village knowing that his brethren are being tortured and holding out against telling on him. And so he went back. And the people tried to talk him out of it. Don't go back. But he had to. And when he went, he says that he greeted the soldiers with a joyful greeting. In fact, he even offered, he said, "Look, come in, be refreshed at my table." How many of you would be willing to do that? Not only are these men looking for you, but you know they're going to kill you, and you know that they have tortured people to try and find you. I picture him smiling, whistling. He comes to him. No fear. Come and be refreshed. I'll serve you. And he feeds them. And then while they were eating, he said, "Let me pray for 1 hour for you." And they let him. They let him say his prayers. And he ended up going on for 2 hours. And he prayed out loud in their presence. He prayed with such sweetness and savor that all who heard him were struck with admiration, several of the soldiers repenting that they were employed against so venerable an old man. Some of those soldiers at least were stricken in their conscience. Who knows what else? Were there any who were converted? Were there any who told the story to someone who was converted? Here's the story of this man who's being persecuted, but he will not stoop to their level. He won't recant his faith, and he won't strike back. "Vengeance is mine," says the Lord. And so he cheerfully submits himself to them and prays for them. Prays for them in such a way, not imprecatory prayers, God break their teeth and bend their backs and ruin their lives. He prays for them and causes a bunch of them at least to be stricken in conscience. But it wasn't enough to save him. He was taken to the city. And while he was there, this is one of the greatest quotes. Whoever he was, the governor or whatever, threatened to feed him to the wild beasts. "Call for them," said Polycarp. "It does not become us to turn from good to evil. It does not become us to turn from good to evil. Seeing you make so light of wild beasts, I will tame you with the more terrible punishment of fire." But Polycarp bravely replied, "You threaten me with a fire that is quickly extinguished, but you are ignorant of the eternal fire of God's judgment reserved for the wicked in the other world. But why do you delay? Order what punishment you please." Wow, that's bravery, isn't it? I'm not turning back. I will feed you to the animals. Call them. It's not going to change my mind. Bring the animals if that's what you want. Since you're not afraid of that, I'll burn you alive. You threaten me with this fire that won't burn more than a day. You know nothing of the fire that awaits the wicked, the eternal judgment of God. Do whatever you want. And they did. They killed him and he died, but that is how he went. Number 3, Justin Martyr. His name is not Justin Martyr. His name is Justin. And because he was a martyr, he was given this name as an honor. He lived from 100 to 165. He was born in a pagan family. He wasn't a Christian. His family wasn't Christian. But even from a young age, he was burdened with the need to find meaning in life, and he tried all the philosophies of his day. Plato and Aristotle, Socrates and all them, they were all there. He was listening to those guys and trying to figure it out. But one day he comes across an old man. That's all anybody knows. He was an old man. And this old man preached the gospel to him. And Justin fell in love, he says, with the prophets and with the gospel and with the word of God. And so he converted. And he became a traveling teacher. He even started a school in Rome, a Christian school. He taught there. While he was there, he wrote what are 2 apologies. Apologies doesn't mean saying you're sorry. An apology is a verbal defense. Rome is taking all these attacks. They're hurting all these Christians. And he writes an apology. He says, listen, you're saying that we eat our children. This is what's true. You're saying that we do this. Here's what we actually do. And so he wrote this apology. And that was a big deal because even confessing that you were a Christian was punishable by death. But he wasn't just confessing to be a Christian. He was saying, you are wrong about what you're saying about us, and this is what's true. The first time he wrote it, it was helpful. The second time, not so much. They were accused of impiety and, again, atheism. He wanted to show that Christianity alone is rational in his second one. Again, that's dangerous. You're saying that the emperor's religion is irrational and only yours is rational. Well, it didn't take very long before he and his disciples were arrested. They were carried to the prefect of Rome. And the command was, recant, stop believing, confess right now that you don't believe in this Christ, that the stuff you've said is not true, or you will be scourged. Which means they're going to be tied to a post and beat with whips like Jesus was until their bones are showing. And then you're going to be beheaded. You know what he said to him? No man who is in his right mind can desert the truth to embrace error and impiety. If I am in my right mind, it's impossible for me to forsake what I know is true to embrace what I know isn't true. So do it. We are Christians and we cannot offer sacrifices to your gods. You know what they did to him? They scourged him and they beheaded him. Just what they said they were going to do. But he didn't let it stop him. Last man, Irenaeus. Not much is known about him. In fact, there's no way to even prove that he was a martyr. There's a tradition that says he was, but that's not why we're going to talk about him. He was around from 130 to 202. He grew up in a Christian family. He heard Polycarp's teachings. He attended Justin Martyr's school in Rome. He was a resident of both Smyrna and Lyons. The story goes that Marcus Aurelius persecuted the Christians who lived in Smyrna, and so this guy, Irenaeus, fled to Lyons in what's now called, it's France. It's Lyons, France. While he was there, he served as both a pastor and a missionary. His contributions, his influence is invaluable. At that time, the Gnostics were around. They had some heresies. He wrote a whole dissertation, a whole reason why you can't say that this spirit is good, but this body is bad, and this divine spark is inside of all of us. Listen, there's only one God. God has only one begotten Son. He taught how Christ fulfilled the prophecies of the Old Testament. He was the first one to recognize that all four Gospels were canon, that they all belonged to the Word of God. He was important. He was a thinker, and he wrote excessively. So, now you know four names. Now you know four people from the 2nd century who contributed to the faith that you have now. What do we do with any of this? What, if anything, can you say, okay, now I know more about Christian history, what good will it do? I'm going to give you just four quick things. History shows that God is faithful. God is faithful to his people. He doesn't leave them stranded. He doesn't let them run out of grace. He doesn't let them run out of courage. He is faithful to his people. History shows that Jesus was right about suffering and persecution. He said there's going to come a time when people think they're doing God a favor when they kill you. And that time came. History shows that Christians can be faithful unto death. What will you do if the time ever comes when it is a capital offense to be a Christian? I'm going to tell you what you'll do. If you are a Christian, you will be faithful unto death. How do I know that? Because of guys like this. Because Justin Martyr. Because Polycarp. Because Ignatius. These men died terrible deaths and walked into it willfully. Because God is faithful. Because they recognize he wasn't wrong when he made that promise to us. He saw it through. We're being persecuted, but we're suffering with him. For him. So it's okay. You will be faithful too. If you are a believer, you will be faithful unto death. He'll give you the grace you need when you need it. And finally, the last thing, history shows that persecution does not kill Christianity. What can kill Christianity? Nothing. Only God could do that. Did he promise he wouldn't? We're his people. He's never going to leave us nor forsake us. As long as he doesn't, as long as he keeps his word, we have a faith that endures. So we're blessed. Jesus, thank you for your promise. Thank you for keeping it. I pray that we would be faithful. I pray for the Christians who are living in parts of the world right now where they are persecuted. God, many of them are contemporary, or they are modern day versions of these old saints. But you have them in your hands the same way you had those men. And I pray for grace for them. I pray for boldness that they might say what they ought. I pray for repentance in their persecutors. But whatever happens, I pray for your glory, that it would be revealed, that your faithfulness would be shown, that you would be vindicated. And I pray that those people would stand strong until the last day. Let us see ourselves with them as though we were also in chains. And let your body be strengthened. In your name we pray. Amen.